All right. Hello, everybody. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming today and for participating and being audience members in our debate today, Cancel Culture, presented by iDebate Rwanda and Waves Debate. Just to introduce our team a little bit, Waves Debate is the Pepperdine Debate team, which encompasses not only our competitive side of debate, as well as our, on campus, our programming side of our debate program, as well as Let's Argue Elementary. We will be recording today's session, so if you are uncomfortable being filmed today, please feel free to turn off your screen. We ask that you keep yourself muted, just so that way we can all hear our wonderful debaters speak today. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jean-Michel. I'd like to ask them to introduce their team for me.
Michelle,
Jean-Michel, would you like to introduce iDebate Rwanda? It seems we might be having some technical difficulties with audio at the moment, but perhaps if each of the debaters from iDebate Rwanda could introduce themselves, and then we'll have our Waves debaters introduce themselves. I'm seeing there's more issues of people who cannot hear. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, just by putting up some sort of, okay, excellent. So I have some people who can hear me. All right, seems the majority of people can hear me. So I'm going to move on. Would the iDebate Rwanda debaters like to introduce themselves? Starting with who is arguing for the pro side of the debate today.
I'm not on the pro side, but I could start off the introductions. My name is Sheja Bryce. Yeah, my name is Sheja Bryce.
well, I think I'm the one you called on. Yeah, I'm doing proposition, and my name is Natasha Gasero.
Mm-hmm. All right, I don't believe our last debater from iDebate Rwanda has quite made it yet, but can the Waves debaters please introduce themselves? Starting with the pro side.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Hi, my name is Anaz Mangula, and I'm for pro cancel culture from Pepperdine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sophia Hofflin, and I am against the cancel culture prompt.
Hello, everyone. My name is Samantha. I'm from Pepperdine, and I am against cancel culture as a concept.
All right, now that we've had the majority of our wonderful debaters introduce themselves, we might as well just jump right into the debate today. I'm so excited. They're discussing the merits of cancel culture, and is cancel culture a societal good? So I'm going to introduce the first speaker from the pro side, that cancel culture is a societal good, starting with, I believe, yes, the pro side.
Okay, so should I turn on my video, or I could just go ahead and debate without turning on my video? Because I have a feeling that if I do, the internet will just be...
If you feel comfortable turning on your video, we would highly encourage it, being that this is going to be recorded and posted on our YouTube channels. However, if you don't feel comfortable, feel free to keep it off. But I will be timing you for 5 minutes for your first speech, so you can begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, let me set a timer, then turn on my video. Okay. So the motion today talks about cancel culture, and I'll be the first speaker from proposition side, debating whether or not cancel culture is a societal good. Now, me and my teammate, will be arguing the following arguments, and I'll be giving you a brief introduction, and then he's going to go into further explaining these things. So cancel culture is basically a culture where people can cancel or stop supporting or engaging with a certain figure or brand because they don't agree necessarily with the things they've been doing in terms of, making racist remarks or sexist remarks, and the list goes on. So these are some of the arguments that we think are in favor of cancel culture and proving that it's the societal good and that it has pushed forward societal progress. So the first can help others more aware of negative figures in the media. I'll give you two scenarios. The first being exposing Harvey Weinstein. The first time he had been charged with countless charges on sexual abuse, racial behaviors, and all these other things. But because of the power he had in society, he was able to dodge through all these multiple lawsuits and still come over 25 years without facing trial for these accusations. It wasn't until the public outcry and pressure through social media as of the Me Too movement that the police finally got involved. And in 2018, he was charged with rape and other several counts of sexual abuse. And in this instance, cancel culture was the justice that society needed. The second is illegal to be in sexual contact with minors and sexually abusing minors. Now, because of Twitter and shame R. Kelly, he was able to be put behind bars, even though he had succeeded escaping trials for 18 years. Now, these are two instances of men who held power in society, were using it to abuse women that would have, in other words, in other societies, in other terms, not been held accountable, that were because of cancel culture, because of this cancel culture on social media, and because of it, our societies were free of such predatory men. Now, the second argument we're going to make is that it encourages others to speak about injustices in society. To make a society that is closer to limiting and fighting injustice, we have to be able to be willing to speak on it. And that's exactly what cancel culture does. Bring room for dialogue, for people to talk about specific issues in the world, and it gets us a step closer to fighting injustice. This means that we, a group, can constantly be aware on comments and inappropriate acts. And in its best form, it's a chance to comment on behavior and stop it immediately, and also to continue to engage in comments and learn about certain things. An example I'll give you, for every argument I'll make, I'll show you an example of how cancel culture has exactly made a positive impact on society. When the Smith family called out the Oscars, everybody was outraged because the Oscars, as an Academy Awards, has been known for being racist. For all the nominees that year in the film category, every nominee was white. So when the Smith family canceled the Oscars, even though everybody was mad, it created room for dialogue. This dialogue ended up helping a lot of Black actors and actresses get recognized in cases that they would have otherwise not gotten. If it wasn't for cancel culture, this dialogue would not have happened and would not have gotten the justice we see today in Academy Awards that has highlighted the significance of acting roles of Black people in America. That's another instance where it has encouraged people to speak about injustices in the world and help people get the justice they require where they would otherwise not have gotten it. The third argument we're going to be making is that cancel culture is not just a haphazard way of just hurting individuals. Yes, we do agree it can cause harm, but just because something isn't perfect does not make it any less positive. Some people can be inadvertently harmed, but the majority that cancel culture has helped root and make known a lot of injustices. The past, present, future implications are better than the harm. And as we shift towards a more politically correct society, holding accountable the biggest oppressors, calling out people, sex traffickers, calling out racist people, it has helped us as a society to be more aware about the things we say, about the way we act, and that way out problematic and default behavior has helped positively impact our society. By being able to express more outrage, cancel culture culture has allowed for modern change. The people in power are still mostly white, male, and rich, but people of color, women, and other marginalized folks have been able to get back the voices that they were denied and fight for power and change the power dynamics because of cancel culture. And that is exactly why it has made a positive impact on societies in the world today. I rest my case. My second speaker will continue to elaborate on most of these cases. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that fantastic first speech on the pro side, that cancel culture is productive and promotes positive progress. Now I will invite the first speaker from the side that cancel culture is unproductive and hinders social change to give their speech of no more than 5 minutes. Please begin whenever you're ready.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sophia Hofflin. My partner, Bryce, and I will be arguing that cancel culture is unproductive and hinders social change. We would like to affirm the first team's point that sometimes those who are canceled may have done bad things. However, this does not mean that we need to normalize cancel culture. As we live in this contemporary realm of social media, technology, and entertainment, in which the impacts of our actions are magnified, I find it necessary to offer a way to frame this discussion with the film Nerve, which hit the entertainment market with a $19 million budget in 2016 and received 93% approval rating. What appeared to be a child's game of innocent dares and supportive followers ended with 2 children forced to stand off with loaded guns. An audience of hundreds surrounds them and thousands, and then sees the code behind each user. Their true identity pops up on each phone, and their persona is revealed. Dad, mom, sister, teenager, grandfather, regardless of their background, most encouraged this killing scene. This is the power of mob mentality. Our goal in this speech is to resist that mentality, even when it is ostensibly used for good, so that we don't normalize it as our own peril. We will argue that mob mentality and retribution is dangerous, has a chilling effect on the democratic process, and is ultimately divorced from the lived experience of the majority people that it seeks to liberate. For my first point, I'll be discussing a letter that made the headlines this summer, signed by over 150 writers, academics, and public figures, such as J.K. Rowling and people all over the political spectrum and world, even President Trump in his recent Rushmore speech. Although quickly dismissed by mainstream media, it really serves as an effective appeal to reject cancel culture. The second part of the letter specifically asserts that it is now all too common to hear calls for swift and severe retribution in response to perceived transgressions of speech and thoughts. More troubling still, institutional leaders in the spirit of panic damage control are delivering hasty and disproportionate punishments instead of considered reforms. Editors are fired for running controversial pieces. Books are withdrawn for alleged inauthenticity. Journalists are barred from writing on certain topics. Even professors are investigated for quoting works of literature in class. This much power to shun a human being may seem like a positive thing when we're canceling racist or sexist, but my Nerve example serves to illustrate that the mob mentality is not always on the side of the righteous, or rather righteousness. My second point is that cancel culture will fail at its own goal, as it is not going to get rid of ideas, but instead drive them underground where they can fester without being tested or confronted. We've already gone down this path globally. Let's take a look at Israel Folau, who was sacked by Rugby Australia for putting a scripture verse on his Instagram account. This obviously is an example of religious discrimination, but we can also take a look at Draw Pavlo at the University of Queensland, who was expelled because of his pro-Hong Kong democracy protests. And those are just the well-publicized cases that we know about. Because of the internet, smartphones, and constant surveillance, it can happen to any of us. This idea in the era of smartphones and instant uploads, that if someone transgresses a narrow bandwidth of acceptable speech and thought, even once, possibly by accident or before they have the chance to learn better, there must be swift retribution, like losing their job, contract, credibility, and etc. This creates a chilling effect that undermines the genuine public discourse and debate. Without debate and its ability to amplify dissenting voices, we lose all hope of democracy and progress. My third point is that postmodernist and Marxist thought is a system of thinking that says that truth claims are about power and control and nothing more noble than that. Thus, if one wants to wrest the power off the powerful people, you need to cancel and shut them down. This is a totalitarian mindset, and no one is safe against its destructive, silencing impacts. Political correctness cuts both ways. Imagine, if you will, the cancel culture that would have existed in the early United States. Slavery and subjugation of Black people was the norm. Abolitionists would have been canceled. We can talk about how the masses making decision for the minority might sound like democracy, but actually it's tyrannical. As the philosopher Thomas Hobbes argues, the birth of a civilization is when the masses submit to a smaller group to govern them, because a world ruled by the masses would lead to anarchy. In Egypt in the 1920s, those who spoke out against female genital mutilation would have been canceled. One side of this debate will argue that those righteous opponents of subjugation were in fact canceled and violently, but that only serves to prove our point that cancel culture is not just something that happens to racists and sexists, but it is a mentality that we are normalizing, and it's dangerous for everyone, whether that be now or in the future when norms change. These academic, postmodern notions of backlash against those who dissent against the norm is decontextualized to serve political agendas, not to serve the oppressed. In fact, taking a closer look, canceling an entire brand or organization does not take into account the tens, if not hundreds, of employees that are making a living through that company. You're not ruining the life of the head of the company alone, who has millions of dollars, but you're hurting the lower ranking employees who depend on that job to support their life and their families. In conclusion, the example of mob mentality I began my speech with from the movie Nerve should serve as a warning to those of us who are thinking canceling is a productive trend. We must take into consideration the courage that it takes for people to share themselves, especially on social media, and at a time in their life where they're growing as a human, like all of us. Thus, I would like to strongly affirm that cancel culture is unproductive because it perpetuates a dangerous mob mentality. It has a chilling effect on the democratic process and is more of a political tool than a liberatory one. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that fantastic speech supporting that cancel culture is unproductive. I'd like to ask the first speaker from the side that cancel culture does not exist. It is merely a rhetorical label and is not a new social construct, to give their first speech to not exceed more than 5 minutes.
Thank you, Tiffany. Today, me and my partner are setting out to add another point of view to an otherwise dichotomous discussion. Namely, I assert that the phrase cancel culture is merely a new way to express the process of human interaction that has occurred for centuries. Cancel culture is not new. It's not a trend that originated on Twitter in 2017, as the term intrinsically suggests. Centuries worth of hard-won progress have gone into the ability to call out those in positions of power for abusing their position to hurt and oppress others. Calling this phenomenon of discreditation cancel culture means that we are observing these important long-term social changes in the context of a fad and doing a discredit to the actual processes of social justice and equality that result in these calls for people to get quote-unquote canceled. First of all, to briefly demonstrate that cancel culture doesn't exist and is just a trendy term to refer to a centuries-long process, let's refer to a couple of historical examples. Some of the most well-known figures in history, Marie Antoinette, Aristotle, Machiavelli, Napoleon, were either exiled or killed for what society saw at the time as unpardonable crimes. These historical examples abused their power in the eyes of their society, and their society rose up against them, which might sound familiar in the context of today's discussion. The voice of the people renouncing those in a position of political, economic, or social power is not a new phenomenon. This is the basis for a good portion of the major social, political, and economic reforms that are placed in any history textbook. Social media has given a stronger voice, just like the printing press amplified the cancel culture of the Reformation period against the Catholic Church, but it doesn't make it a new phenomenon. The creation of new technology itself does not create a new phenomenon. A mass call to take away the cultural capital of a person is as old as culture itself. And so then, why does it matter that we make this distinction, that we admit that cancel culture isn't a new phenomenon that popped up overnight, and to use different language to describe it? The main issue I have with cancel culture is that it refers to a cultural demonification of a single person for a short period of time. It is a process and terminology that doesn't acknowledge the systematic problems within society today that lead to these acts of a single person. By saying that you engage in cancel culture, or that cancel culture is a new trend, you are distancing yourself from the long-term process of social change, which is what we actually need to be concerned about in this moment. Whether canceling someone is effective or not, what we need is more citizens who are concerned about long-term projects of social justice and equality, instead of merely engaging on the surface-level discourse that the phrase cancel culture promotes as a societal trend. Because this process isn't a new thing, engaging in calling it a trend only stands to distance it from the roots of progress that lead to actual growth. By buying into cancel culture, we could take the actions of, for example, J.K. Rowling's transphobia and racism as a single demonizing instance, and call our reaction to these forms of discrimination good after adding a hashtag to an Instagram post and then moving on with our lives. Whether this works or not, cancel culture obscures the society's real reaction to acts of discrimination by J.K. Rowling should be engaging in political activism and learning more about the history of gay and civil rights that leads to actual change. The same follows true for anyone else who is the subject of cancel culture. We cannot just address a single rapist or a single racist. We must cause long-term change within the very structure of society to root out these issues. This rhetorical label of cancel culture creates a harmful oversimplification of engaging in issues that really matter. It points away from the problem instead of towards it, away from the centuries-long process and towards the momentary moral superiority of a single social media post. It obscures that we have all lived in and in some ways benefited from systematic social oppression of others. The phrase cancel culture and what it represents might be enough to cancel a single bad actor, but the phrase does not have enough power to cancel the fact that the very fabric of life everyone acts in has discrimination woven into it. It is not that the people acting in cancel culture have bad intentions. The rhetorical phrase and framework just obscure the process of meaningful change from the discussion. In the end, cancel culture is not only a rhetorical label, but cancel culture is just a rhetorical label, but by engaging in the rhetorical sensational trend embodied by the label, we are denying the history of social change that everyone needs to participate in to create further growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that first speech on the side of cancel culture as a rhetorical label. Now I'd like to introduce the second speaker for the side that cancel culture is productive. Can you please give your second speech to exceed no more than 5 minutes?
Can you hear me? I've been having tech difficulties. I'm so sorry, Tiffany.
Yes, we can hear you. No worries.
Thanks, Abby. Thanks, Tiff. Okay. I find it very alarming on how many types of discourse we're having in this very debate as of right now. I see a lot of the chat even talking about there's a lot of varying definitions of what is cancel culture. And he's right. What is cancel culture? Let's kind of solidify that first. As my first teammate defined it, cancel culture was essentially an act of disclosing or making aware the issues that many public figures are doing that are heinous, such as with R. Kelly, the abuse of children, and Harvey Weinstein, the abuse of minority women. We see this as looking at a main figure being attacked for his heinous or immoral type of crimes by the minority. But as we can see by the other two arguments, it seems to be any act of trying to bring down a figure that is higher than the rest by this sort of mob mentality that A, either is terrible or B, doesn't exist. But the main key figure that a lot of them are missing in their definitions is that that's not what cancel culture is. This idea that is a trend. What makes something a trend? It has to be, of course, done by the majority. But if you look at how cancel culture started, it wasn't done by the majority. It was done by the minority. Much as like when people talk about natural hair and Black girls, it was always started out as something unprofessional in the workplace. But once it's taken up by the majority, it's now a trend. But let me clarify this once and for all, that cancel culture isn't a trend. It was started by the minority as a way of living and succeeding a better way. As we can see with the Harvey Weinstein debate, we are talking about women being figuratively assaulted by male figures. And once that started spreading, we can see this new idea of the men's right movement in contrast of the Me Too movement. Why was that necessary? Because women finally were taking up their own power to go against a public figure who was male. So it seems that the only reason it's not good is because it's now trending by the majority. But cancel culture, like my opponent said, Sophia Hofen, when it was done in like the Pharaohs or abolitionists would have been canceled. They wouldn't have been canceled because it would have been the minority backing up the abolitionists in the first place, canceling those like General Robert E. Lee and those who supported these racially biased institutions in the first place. So what we really need to look at is, what is cancel culture? It is one done by the minority to go against the harms of the majority. And secondly, what is this trending aspect and what is this mob rule mentality? Well, is it actually mob rule? For instance, do we all agree that killing is bad? If we all had said yes, that is not a mob mentality. That is a sense that we all know that it is wrong. That is not a bad thing to understand it. If cancel culture can bring about a mutual understanding between a majority of people that something is wrong, something is heinous, whether it's sexual assault, racial bias, then that's something we should promote. Well, yes, I understand that it is not perfect. We can affect people that if we attack a group of an organization or corporation, yes, other people's jobs are at stake. But that wasn't the issue when the majority was attacking the minority and hurting them little by little. It seems that when it affects the majority and then white individuals or more than the people who are being subjugated are now affected, then it becomes an issue. Or then it's a topic of that, oh, this doesn't exist. It does exist. And it's not an issue for the minority who are using this as an aspect of for their own survival. So what we should really be looking at is, why is cancel culture better than the apparent harms? Well, yes, it can hurt individuals. And yes, there can always be issues of misunderstanding and misjudgment. But that can happen in any type of communication. But the thing that we should be looking at is promoting that communication. And by saying that cancel culture is bad, you're hindering that level of communication. And if someone is, let's use an example, Twitter. You can see Twitter arguments. And while some of you would suggest, oh, that's the negative thing, people shouldn't be going back and forth. But that is a conversation we should be promoting. Of course, there needs to be better rules and regulations in society on how we talk about cancel culture, how we use it in everyday life. But that doesn't mean to get rid of it, and that doesn't mean it's an overall harm. What the two debaters that should be looking at next, or what the overall argument should have noticed, is that one, cancel culture is not something for the majority and is not a mob trend. It is something done by the minority, and that the majority has taken over and is now trying to pervade it and perfute it to make it something ugly. When we should be looking at it at its original form as a tool for the minorities to better help their social standing and attack the figures in power who are constantly harming them. And secondly, not to dismiss it as something that is trending or that has never existed. We can see it throughout history, like Samantha Miller said. Even though it wasn't known as cancel culture, we can see that the minority has always tried to find ways of rising up. That is cancel culture, and it becomes, like we said, history, it repeats. It's a pattern, and it's coming back again today, so that we can see that cancel culture is a good, because one, it's promoting communication. Can it be harmful? Yes, but we're trying to make it better, and that's why it should stay. Secondly, it's a tool for the minority that we need to use to create better communication and mutual understanding of what we do want to happen in society. And three, it's a better goal because without it, it's something that we cannot live for the minority. It's something that the majority needs to understand, so it's not just mob rule, but actually society growing and becoming better. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that second speech for cancel culture is productive. That was fantastic. Now I'm going to pass it over to the second speaker for cancel culture is unproductive to give a second speech no longer than 5 minutes. You can begin when you're ready.
Okay, so I'm going to be arguing exactly why cancel culture has been unproductive in its history and why it has actually hindered social change. So in the beginning of the preceding speech that's just taken place, they argued that the definition of cancel culture or everything, they tried to define cancel culture in a way that could simplify the debates to the judges or whoever is watching. I'm going to take it a step further and ask for there to be a definition for the exact word to be canceled. Now, on one hand, we could be arguing about Harvey Weinstein and you know, all of these different people who were talked about in the first speech of this entire debate. But on the other hand, I just don't feel like that's really where the debate should be taken, because a lot of the time when these people commit crimes, they'll end up in prison, which is the legal system's way of canceling a person. So I don't want to talk about that. And I don't think in my team's first speech, we even mentioned that, because the legal system in itself does its job. And I believe that when it doesn't do its job, we should focus on improving improving the way that we search for people, and improving the way that police check on sexual assault, and improving all of those things. Instead of saying cancel culture is going to do all of these things for us, we should be saying let's improve the policing system of the world, the policing systems of the world. Therefore, I don't want to talk about these crimes that have been committed. I want to talk more about the social offenses that have been committed, be it through racism or homophobia or transphobia, talking about people like J.K. Rowling or Donald Trump, or those people who haven't necessarily committed a specific crime, but they said something that was extremely offensive, and that's the reason they're being canceled. We also believe this is the thing that happens in the majority of the time. That's the reason it's often on social media instead of being in legal courts. Because a lot of the time when these people are being canceled, it's because of something that they said, not necessarily because of a crime that they committed, because if it was because of a crime that they committed, logically they would be put in prison, right? And if they aren't, let's fix that. Let's not pretend as if a cancel culture is the fix all to this situation, right? So although the second speaker of the first team has talked all about how it was initially something for the minorities, it was initially something for to fix oppression or anything. The issue is, I want to tell you, the judges and the audience today, that yes, it was initially that, but it's not that anymore. At this point, it is something that's it's something that the audience and the spectators of celebrities and everything take advantage of to make sure that the people who they don't like or they don't agree with get taken down with the full force. And we view it as some kind of spectacle where we see people like Kanye West or whoever getting canceled every other week because we like seeing rich people fail, because that's something that on the inside as human beings we like to see, and that sucks, but it's just true. We can see that you can see that in people like Justine Sacco, who tweeted something stupid, which wasn't necessarily illegal. She didn't tweet anything illegal by any definition of the word, but she tweeted something stupid, got canceled. She still doesn't have a job. She still has PTSD. She still has depression. And this is something that happens every single day for thousands upon thousands of people. And we believe that that's not something that helps. In the second speech, again, and I'm going to keep weighing in on this speech, right? They talked about how communication is the key. And while we agree with you, we don't understand why you would make that one of your points, because that's obviously something on our side. Because the definition of canceling is saying, no, we're not going to listen to you anymore. You're out of the conversation. You made that one mistake maybe a few years ago, or even now, right? But a lot of the time it happens a few years ago, and they made that mistake, and we're not going to listen to you ever again. We're not going to buy any of your products. We're not going to watch any of your movies. Therefore, it's done. There's no space for communication by the definition of cancel culture. Therefore, if we actually want communication, then we cannot leave this space up, okay? And the next thing I'm going to talk about is this third speech that came up before the second speech. Sorry, I have weird order, but bear with me. They argued that it's just a label, the cancel culture is just a label for something that's always been there, and gave examples of people like Marie Antoinette and Napoleon and everything. And I could go on and on about how those people committed crimes, and obviously they shouldn't be considered inside of this debate. But instead of that, I'm going to talk about how the fact of oppressed people having voices, the fact of there being social media, is something that's very specific to right now, and that's why we argue that that's a culture that's been created right now. While on the other hand, Napoleon and Marie Antoinette and all of those guys are exceptions from the past, and therefore we don't feel like those are things that we should continue arguing about. All right, so we argue that there's three reasons why we don't like social cancel culture. Number one, there is no order to it, because we don't know who it is. We don't have any specific way that we decide who it is that's going to get canceled and who it is that won't, right? So for example, someone like Eminem is going to be openly homophobic, but he hasn't been canceled yet. While on the other hand, someone like Justine Sacco, a completely ordinary, very, very small person with only 170 followers, is definitely going to be canceled. There's no order to this system. And because there is no order, it ends up making a system where it's going to make one of two systems. One, people are going to feel like because there is no order, they should be allowed to say whatever they want, and it doesn't actually fix the issue that we're talking about. Or it's going to create a system where everyone who has these feelings and has these opinions is either going to keep it down or go into another area so that they can share their information. So for example, instead of sharing their information or their racist opinions on Twitter, they're just going to go to Reddit, and that population of Reddit is just going to increase. Let me give you an illustration. Such as that of a school, right? Let's say that there's a school where everyone is trying to learn how to become something, right? And then there's some students who just aren't learning as well. They aren't understanding these concepts, and they say the wrong answer every once in a while. But you're going to end up expelling them. That's what cancel culture is. That's when the principal expels the student who doesn't get the right answer. Instead, we should keep that student inside of that school and inside of that class and get the opportunity to learn with the other students instead of saying, you're done, you made a mistake, you're out. Okay, I could also talk about how we shouldn't leave all of these decisions up to the masses because that's anarchy, as my first speaker already talked about. But another thing is, imagine if we treated the criminal justice system the same way that we treat cancel culture. Imagine if there was no fair trial for any of these people who committed crimes. There was nothing. And then they just sent them straight to prison, where they were going to stay there for the rest of their lives without any opportunity to be given a second chance. That is not a fair system. And I know I've been arguing from a mostly philosophical perspective, and I know I've gone way over time. But I feel that everyone, first of all, most people have a right to a second chance, and we shouldn't be focusing on people who have committed crimes because those people should be canceled by the legal system, not by the people. And that's something that does happen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for that amazing second speech. For the side of cancel culture is unproductive. That was awesome. I'd like to now introduce the second speaker for the third and final side of this debate today, which is cancel culture does not exist, to give a speech no longer than 5 minutes. Please begin whenever you are ready. I'll repeat just in case our debater didn't hear, just in case of any technical difficulties. But I would like to introduce the person who's giving the second speech for Cancel Culture Does Not Exist. Perhaps if you're having some technical difficulties, if you could throw that in the chat for me really quickly. But otherwise, please begin your speech when you're ready. If there's any technical difficulties, please let us know. I believe it's supposed to be Blessed.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I was having a little bit of an internet problem. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
And even if it's text. Can you still hear me? I'm gonna start.
We
Hello?
can hear you. It seems to be a little bit staticky, I think just because of your connection. But we can give it a shot and you can go ahead and start. And then maybe if we're still having some issues, perhaps your partner could take over your speech notes for you.
Okay. Let me see if I can try.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead to emphasize on how cancel culture is simply a rhetorical level, and I'm going to do this in another angle in support of my partner, though. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to show you how cancel culture not being authentic to its ideal goals just makes it a rhetorical level and not actually practical. Now, how I'm going to do this is I'm going to show you that it simply implies several other ideas and that it has different or reverse return. It would have to deeper level with the issue it presents with. It was to promote deterrence by calling out the people with problematic ideologies, but it is counterproductive and actually does not meet and not authentic to that in both ways, because it affects sometimes the person who calls out or the person who's canceling the offender or the person with the problematic ideology and the person who's being called out, because it dubs the canceled person person irredeemable. And now this is problematic because instilling an idea in society that everyone will make a mistake at some point. So if we're talking about what ideas we had in the past most people used to think females were inferior to males. And now in a time and era like that, when people just go with the idea that is in place and then later on, when we change, we still hate on those people who are in then we're just and that is just wrong to assume that somebody deserves to be hated on. Somebody does not deserve a second chance to life simply because they make a mistake.
Blessed, I think we're having some issues hearing you. I think just the connection isn't working out. So I think,
because which means it's as useless as any movement can be. It's just public shaming to society. Yes.
I think we're having issues hearing you. So I think if you want to give your points to Samantha, I think I'm going to have her read them for you, just so that way we can all hear all the points that you've so carefully crafted. I just want to make sure that your message is getting across to everybody. So if Samantha, if you feel comfortable, could you read Blessed points for her, please?
Sure, no problem. I'm so sorry we couldn't hear you, Blessed. So to begin, I'll kind of restate what Blessed had already said. Cancel culture is simply a rhetorical label because it's not authentic to its ideal goals. To be less than a rhetorical label, it would have to engage on a deeper level with the issues it presents with. And so one of her first points was it was to promote deterrence by calling out people with problematic ideologies. However, it is counterproductive in both ways. And I think we see that this is counterproductive in many of the arguments advanced by Bryce and Sophia. So we're just gonna kind of add to them there. First of all, it dubs the canceled person irredeemable. And this is problematic because instilling an idea in society that people are unable to change goes against every societal principle, and everyone will make a mistake at some point. So we're just going to spread hate to everyone else. And so I think we see this idea here that when we're engaging in cancel culture, we're actually acting against the very type of change that we're trying to promote with it. Therefore, it's kind of a contradiction there. And then another point West had is it leaves no room for discussion, which means it is useless as any movement can be. It is just public shaming of the person, which leaves them desperately excluded from society. Everyone thinks that they're a gone case and a danger to society. The one mistake that someone might have made unintentionally or not wrecks their whole life. And so if we actually want to engage in societal change, we're going to have to allow room for change, right? It's the very definition of it. If we just cast off everyone who doesn't make that change with us, then we're not actually going to incur real change. We're not actually going to have the discussions that matter. And so even to those who are the ones who are calling out these celebrities or these people in positions of power who are abusing themselves, it sometimes backfires, and they're the ones that society dubs unforgivable for the simple fact that they tried to impart change using the formulas the world taught them. I mean, this kind of builds off the point I was doing. We're all acting within a system that is bigger than cancel culture itself can acknowledge. And so then we start seeing some implicit contradictions in the system. We're trying to create change. We're trying to do things that matter. But even those who are acting to create change can be acting against the very change they're trying to create because it doesn't go deep. It doesn't act on the things that really matter in the world, and it just acts on a single person. And so then this also continues with the point that the second team was making. Cancel culture can back up this kind of mob mentality. It gets people working every day to be in everyone's good graces, and therefore discourages growth and the adventurous part of life. To make change, we have to be able to go out there. We have to be willing to have discussions that might make us uncomfortable. And so when we see it, cancel culture sets up a culture where those discussions aren't really able to happen. Whether we see change in some parts of society or not, unless if everyone in society is willing to participate in the conversations that allow change, we won't see change in everyone. And that's what we really need to see, is everyone feeling okay to make change in themselves and to participate in a process of change. And so then calling out celebrities without the intention to have a discussion is a complete waste. All we have with it is it gives the critics the right to crucify these people with word and publicly shame them with the tag that is cancel culture. And so it says that these people don't deserve a second chance. And if we're not willing to give people a second chance in society, then this really isn't working for societal change. And I think that that's something we've seen here in everyone's points, is that everyone thinks that cancel culture should be trying to work towards societal change. And if it isn't accomplishing that goal, if it isn't, if its very nature doesn't work towards accomplishing that goal, then we have to say, okay, this is merely a rhetorical label because it doesn't engage with these very things that we're trying to accomplish, and therefore it is self-contradictory. I think that's about where Blessed wanted to leave off. So if she has anything else to add to the discussion, maybe she can jump back in and post it in the chat. But thank you all, everyone else, for your contributions to this discussion as well.
Thank you so much, Samantha, for giving Blessed speech. Again, I apologize for technical difficulties. I really do hope that we can hear you give your own speech in the future, Blessed. I thought all the points that you had written out were really great. Now that we have concluded the speech portion of our event today, I'm going to go through the chat and read out some of the questions that our audience members have submitted. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to submit those, and we'll take some time for a Q&A portion. So let's see, our first question. Though cancel culture may have positive effects, given that it can hold others accountable, does it have potential to create a self-fulfilling prophecy for those potentially canceled when they shouldn't be? Anyone can answer this question.
Can she explain it? Because I think I get it, but I don't want to assume I get it and then I don't answer it.
All right. I believe this was written by Haley. If you have a clarification, could you drop that in the chat for us, please? That way our debaters can answer your question.
Or say it. I don't mind hearing
Or
it.
say it, unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hey, AJ. Haley's someone from one of my classes. So they've been learning about how when people label us something, whether that label is like accurate to begin with or not, we start to believe it about ourselves, internalize it, and then act according to that label. So I think Haley's asking, like, is there a risk of that happening with cancel culture? If someone's inaccurately labeled, them internalizing that notion and behaving in ways consistent with that label when they wouldn't have done that previously.
Oh, then I totally agree. That's absolutely possible. I won't even try to deny it. What do I think that overall hurts if cancel culture can be used as a good thing? No, because that also just works with you just joining like groups. So like joining the debate club or sports has you assigned to certain labels that you eventually either become accustomed to or you don't become accustomed to. So I think if is that a harm that is only strictly for cancel culture? No. It just comes along with it because that's a societal issue, not one that's strictly for cancel culture. But yes, it is a part of it, if that answers your question.
Awesome, awesome. I'm looking for another question. I believe this one is from Braden. It says, when someone like Kanye West, who has had many positive contributions to society, gets canceled, how does that influence his personal life, relationships, and professional life? And why would he continue to do good when everyone has turned? So perhaps generalizing it even further to just someone who has done societal good and then gets canceled. So Sophia, I think you have an answer.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many ways to expand. This is such a great question. There's so many ways to answer it. I would like to start by saying that I think it's important to look at the difference between rich, famous, opinionated people getting canceled and ordinary people getting canceled. So if we look at Kanye West, we can see he's done a lot of good for society, and just to look at it plainly, canceling him is not going to remove his platform. He's still going to have a big audience, loyal and devout followers and supporters. So I think it's ineffective, especially when it comes to those types of people. And then also canceling people who have done good for society and maybe not even giving them the chance to, even if they're ordinary, defend themselves. I think that would be another point to add on to it being ineffective, just to tie it back to the debate.
Yeah, and I want to answer that too. I remember I posted something in the chat when I saw that question because it was really good. But mine would, I think of the comparison as like to your mother or to your parent or your guardian. I'm sure you haven't always said like the best things about them or you've gotten into disagreements with them, But because you've disagreed or maybe gone against what they've done, it's not equal to canceling. But that doesn't stop them from caring for you, because it would be a name, because their job or their reason of doing it because it's out of love and genuine wanting to do so. So going back to Kanye West or anyone who's famous, if the reason they stop doing something that is generally good for their community or other communities because of a comment that is generally against them, what would be the true motive of them even doing good in the first place? Because if then that's where you see the object of he's doing good for accolades, and that in and of itself isn't something we should be praising. Like, you shouldn't be nice to people because they'll say, oh my God, you're such a nice person. You should do it because it's a good thing. So if they do stop doing the community contributions, that's something you actually should be aware of. It's like, oh, he's outlined for doing A, B, or C, whether true or not. But because of that, he has now stopped doing the good things he's once done. So is he such a good figure, or is he such a neutral figure like we originally thought? And that's the ideas of conversation or even questioning we see in the societal culture is good argument.
Tiffany, is it okay if I ask him a question about what he just said? So I was just wondering, are you saying that communal activities pertaining to cancel culture outweigh negative things that are said? So are you saying that we wouldn't necessarily cancel someone if they would do good activities for their community?
No, I'm suggesting the exact opposite. It's that I'll keep people held accountable. I mean, if they want to do good for their community and someone has, let's just go against my argument that comes from good. They've outrightly just made up a false accusation about this person for no apparent reason, right? That's basically the main argument to everyone. And they've tried to cancel that person. And this person has done good for their community or other communities. If they stop doing that, what intention would they have to stop doing that just because they were canceled? I mean, if someone was genuinely good for their community, one or multiple bad comments about them as a person shouldn't stop them from wanting to help the overall good. So that's when you get a chance to even notice for yourself, why are they doing these things to the community? Well, yes, they may be good, but it's the fact that, are they just doing this for praise? Are they just doing this for self-accolades or even a better self-identity? And that's something in our society that we should also question and also be aware of. Because if you're only doing something because it makes you look good, this opens up ideas of white saviorism and the white savior complex, or just not even actually doing good moral things. It's more just doing things that are ethical because it makes you look better.
So just one last thing. So in some ways, it's plausible that it's ineffective. That cancel culture would be ineffective in stopping their voice and allowing for the other things you mentioned.
Is there an opening to it? Absolutely. But is it just something that's wholeheartedly pervasive? That's something I, of course, I'm still thinking about. I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm always, for the sake of the debate, I'm going to say no. You can still have cancel culture and still try to engage in that conversation despite the negative. It's just the fact that you always need to try to find a way to stay in that conversation, even if those are pushing you out, because minorities have been pushed out of conversations for centuries, and we've always found a way to try to stay current in it. So it's just trying to keep a new perspective on it.
Okay, I could keep discussing. I'll let other people ask their questions.
All right, so we're going to move on to our next question from Nicholas. And they ask, I believe this is towards the side that believes that cancel culture is unproductive. So it is, why is it wrong for people to withhold their money from funding a company that they do not agree with? In a nation that prides itself on liberty and freedom for all, why is it that when people exercise their right to use their voice and money, it is suddenly a problem? Perhaps maybe Bryce, you could answer this, or perhaps Sophia.
I'm sorry, do you think you can repeat the question?
Sure, I can repeat the question. It is, why is it wrong for people to withhold their money from funding a company that they do not agree with? So if they canceled the company, so to speak, in a nation that prides itself on liberty and freedom for all, so America specifically, why is it that when people exercise their right to use their voice and money, it is suddenly a problem?
Yeah, I can start. I'm not sure if I understand the question entirely, but I wish I could see the question. I know that the chat has been very productive.
I think perhaps to maybe reword, why is it unproductive to cancel a company? So the question is if you're not contributing funds to a company that you don't believe in, why then is it still unproductive?
Yes, okay, absolutely. I mentioned this in my speech. So it's the idea of canceling an entire brand or organization. It doesn't take into account the tens of hundreds of employees that are making a living through that company. So by canceling the company, or you're not just ruining the life of the head of the company who will have the millions of dollars to survive, like the rich and famous who won't lose their platform, followers, they'll still have that voice. You're ruining the lives of the low-ranking employees who depend on that job for their livelihood, to support their lives and their families. This job is necessary for them. So that would be why, because the hundreds of employees that are part of that company whose lives are being hurt.
And just to add on to that, like as she said, it's only that person who made that negative comment about a group of people with a brand and everything. And so that person is going to be affected. But even that person, like it's not going to affect them in a way for positive change. It's going to affect them in a shutting down the negativity. So in the end of it all, it's ineffective because it's neutral. Because this is a person who's doing something negative, right? And if you remove that negative, it becomes neutral. You're not making anything positive because you're not educating that person in the slightest. You're just shutting them up, which is ineffective in the grand scheme of things. And when you're neutral towards something like social change and everything, because of the way that humans are, it's regressive because we're always trying to progress. If you hold a human being still, we regress. Or is regress? Okay, yeah.
Thank you so much. I think with that, we're going to close. Ooh,
can I just say one more thing? I just wanted to say on the topic of to answer their question, you can choose to not support a company. And that's like your own freedom. That's like it's democratic freedom of speech. You have the right to be able to not support a company and then give them the chance to maybe change their ways. But I just wanted to say that you don't need to necessarily cancel them and shut them out and not give them a chance to explain themselves or amend what they have to say, because how are we supposed to learn and grow from others if we don't hear their voices or maybe learn from our own mistakes? So thanks.
All right. Thank you to all of our wonderful debaters today. That's going to wrap up our Q&A session. I'd like to pass it off to Jean-Michel to give some closing remarks for us today. But thank you so much.
Thank you all the debaters. I think this discussion was amazing. I think that it elevated the common discourse when it comes to such an issue. And I think just like Abby had written it up there, it is amazing because this is the world that I would like to live in, where we can have these really serious and important discussions, but in a civil manner. So thank you to everyone, all the debaters. Thank you, Tiffany, for always making this happen. Thank you, Abby, and all of these, and also thank you, Waves Debate, for always inviting us and having these discussions and these really important discussions. I always say Waves Debate is my second home, so it's great to see some old faces and a lot of new faces. And I'm excited to always work with you all. And I'm also excited because this is a vision that Abby and I talked about, maybe 3-4 years ago, and I'm seeing it come to fruition. So this is exciting. And yeah, thank you all for tuning in, and have a great evening and have a great day on your side.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. That concludes our event for today. Thank you for tuning in. We hope that you all have a great rest of your day.